They said they wanted me there. Swore up and down that it wouldn't be the same without me. "Fly out, Mum. We want you here for Thanksgiving," Daniel had said on the phone. His voice syrupy, brimming with warmth I hadn't heard in years. And so I did. I packed the porcelain pie dish I'd been using since 1987, wrapped in layers of tea towels as though it were a newborn. I folded my new navy cardigan, the soft wool one I'd splurged on for the trip, and laid it neatly on top of my clothes. Into the side pocket of my case went 2 hardback books for the children and a ribbon-tied box of dark truffles for Olivia, because she'd always loved them. And somewhere in the smallest corner of my suitcase, though I didn't admit it to myself at the time, I packed every ounce of softness I had left. When the plane touched down at Manchester Airport, I thought my heart might burst with anticipation. The arrival hall was alive with the sound of reunions, shouts, laughter, the rhythmic roll of suitcases on polished floors. Beneath the great green "Arrivals" sign, clusters of people stood clutching bouquets, balloons, or cardboard signs with hand-lettered names. Little children dashed into waiting arms. Teenagers pretended not to care until their faces crumpled in relief. Couples kissed in a way that made you look away out of respect. And there I stood, Gate 12B, my wheeled suitcase beside me, my winter coat folded over one arm because the heating in the terminal made the air thick and warm. It had been 42 minutes since my flight landed. I knew the exact time because I'd checked twice. The queue at passport control hadn't been long. I'd made it to arrivals in minutes, and yet no familiar faces. I'd also reread Olivia's text 3 times, as if the words might change if I stared long enough. "We'll be there. The kids can't wait to see you." I'd replied straight away, "Flight lands at 3:10. Can't wait to hug everyone." No reply, but I hadn't thought much of it. Now, though, I didn't sit down. Somehow, sitting felt like surrender, like admitting I'd been forgotten. My phone buzzed. I snatched it up, heart skipping, only to find it wasn't a call, not even a text. Just a notification from Facebook. Normally I wouldn't care, but sometimes Daniel or Olivia posted family photos there before remembering to call me. I tapped it open, and there they were. Daniel, in the navy jumper I'd given him last Christmas. Olivia, smiling broad and tanned as ever. The children, Elliot and Sophie, crowded around a table glowing with candlelight. A roast turkey, bowls of buttery mash, cranberry sauce gleaming like rubies. And there, just left of center, a golden pie. Not my pie. They were all raising glasses in a toast. The caption read, "Full house, full hearts. Happy Thanksgiving from our family to yours." I stared at the photograph until my eyes blurred. There was no mistake. No empty chair, no extra place setting, no room for me at that table. I didn't cry, not then. I turned, pulled my coat on, wrapped the belt twice around my waist, and began walking past the luggage trolleys, past the cluster of taxi drivers holding name cards, past the bright yellow shuttle bus signs. I didn't know where I was going. I only knew one thing for certain. I would not be standing there when they remembered me. 3 days earlier, Daniel had phoned. That alone should have warned me. My son never calls without a reason. Usually, it's a text for my birthday, or to remind me of some bill I'd promised to help with. But that afternoon, his voice was light, almost eager. "Mum, you doing anything for Thanksgiving?" I told him I'd planned to stay home, roast a small chicken, maybe bake a pie if my hands weren't too stiff, watch an old black and white film, just me and the radio murmuring in the background. "Nothing fancy," I'd said. There'd been a pause, the kind where you can almost hear someone thinking, calculating. "Well," he said at last, "the kids have been asking about you. Thought maybe you'd like to come here this year. Everyone will be together. It wouldn't feel right without you." That last sentence, "wouldn't feel right without you," landed somewhere deep in me. It had been a long time since I'd felt truly wanted. Needed, yes. Called upon, depended on, asked for favors. But wanted. There's a world of difference. I'd said yes before I could talk myself out of it. Daniel didn't offer to book my ticket or cover the cost, and I didn't ask. I had the envelope with last Christmas's unspent money tucked away for emergencies. I decided this counted. After we hung up, I held the phone for a while, my fingers curled around the smooth edges. I tried to remember the last time I'd felt excited, not anxious or dutiful, but genuinely excited. The last time someone had invited me without tacking on a request. I booked my flight that same evening, a non-stop from Bristol to Manchester, on sale. I even paid the extra £12 for a seat with more legroom, a little indulgence, but I thought, why not? If I was traveling halfway up the country, I could at least do it comfortably. The next morning, I went shopping. I bought 2 new novels for Elliot and Sophie, each wrapped in bright paper with their names in silver pen. For Olivia, I found a small box of dark chocolate truffles. She'd once mentioned they were her favorite. And for myself, the cardigan. Navy blue, soft wool, the kind that drapes elegantly at the hips and makes you feel as though you might belong in the photograph for once. I packed 3 days ahead, checked the weather forecast, set my heating low, and took the bins out early. I didn't tell my bridge group I was going, didn't want to invite questions. Or perhaps I was afraid of jinxing it. It had been so long since anyone had said, "Come, we want you here." Thanksgiving morning, the airport in Bristol was a tide of rolling cases, padded jackets, and people clutching takeaway coffees. I smiled at a baby across the aisle, shared a brief nod with another older woman reading a paperback. Both of us with our hands in our laps, both with stories unspoken. When the plane touched down in Manchester, I smoothed my skirt, brushed a crumb from my lap. I'd worn my good shoes, the black leather ones with the tiny heel, because I wanted to look like the kind of woman you invited. And for a little while, I believed I was, until I wasn't. The walk from baggage claim to the exit felt longer than it should have. Perhaps it was the weight of the suitcase. Perhaps it was something heavier entirely. I passed the coffee kiosks, the joyful reunions, the young woman crying into her boyfriend's shoulder. I didn't feel bitter then, just displaced, as though someone had pressed pause on me while the rest of the world carried on. Outside, the sky was that dull gray you get in a British November, the kind that seeps into your bones. My phone remained silent. 3:54 p.m. Dinner probably wouldn't start until 5 or 6. I told myself they were just busy. The kids were being wild. The turkey needed basting. There were a dozen harmless reasons. But harmless reasons still sting when you're standing alone at arrivals. I stayed on the curb another 20 minutes before my knees began to ache. That was when the Facebook notification came through, like the cruelest punchline. The photograph, the caption, the absence. Not the first time I'd been left out, but the first time I let myself name it, forgotten. I pulled my suitcase handle out with a snap and started walking. Not towards the taxis or the bus stop, but away. Half a mile from the terminal, I saw it. A squat little building with a flickering neon sign. Annie's Diner. The windows steamed up from the warmth inside, paper turkeys taped to the glass. I pushed the door open and was greeted by the smell of hot oil and cinnamon. A waitress with a short ponytail looked up from behind the counter. "Happy Thanksgiving, love." "And to you," I replied, surprised at how steady my voice sounded. I slid into a booth by the window. The seat was warm, the table clean. "Kitchen's a bit slow today," the waitress said as she handed me a menu. "But we've got turkey and pie." "Pie sounds good," I said. "What kind?" She grinned. "Pumpkin, pecan, or key lime?" "Pumpkin and a cup of tea, please." When it came, the crust was flaking golden, the filling still warm. a dollop of cream listing lazily to one side. The tea was strong, faintly bitter, the way I like it. I took a bite, then another. It was the best pie I'd tasted in years. Not for the spice or the pastry, but because for once I hadn't made it for anyone else. I ate slowly, savoring each forkful. I didn't check my phone. I didn't wait for anyone to walk in and tell me it was all a misunderstanding. They weren't coming. Not today. Maybe not ever. It had been months since Daniel last called me, properly called. Not one of those short, distracted birthday messages, or the kind of polite check-in that comes with a request attached. So when the phone rang on Monday afternoon, and his name flashed across the screen, I hesitated for a moment before answering. "Mum," he began, voice unusually bright. "Are you doing anything for Thanksgiving?" I was in the kitchen at the time, standing by the window with a mug of tea cooling in my hands. Outside, the late November light lay flat across the garden, the lawn slick from the morning's drizzle. I hadn't planned much, I told him. Just me at home, a small chicken in the oven. Maybe I'll bake a pie if my hands aren't too stiff. I thought I'd watch one of those old films on the telly, something black and white. Nothing fancy then, he said. A faint pause following his words. I could almost hear the cogs turning in his head. Nothing fancy, I confirmed. He was silent for a beat longer, and when he spoke again, there was a different timbre in his voice, measured, deliberate. "Well," he said, "the kids have been asking about you. Thought maybe you'd like to come here this year. Everyone will be together. It wouldn't feel right without you." The phrase caught me. Wouldn't feel right without you. For a moment, the kitchen around me felt brighter, warmer. I couldn't remember the last time I'd been described as essential to something. Not for the roast potatoes I might bring, not for the babysitting, not for my ability to mend a torn costume an hour before a school play, but for me, just me. I felt my throat tighten, though my voice came out steady. "Are you sure?" "Of course," he said quickly. "We'd love to have you. It'll be a full house this year. Olivia's parents can't make it, so there'll be plenty of space." That last part shouldn't have stung, but it did. Still, I pushed the thought aside. This was an invitation, and I wasn't going to prod it for flaws. "All right," I said. "I'll find a flight." "Brilliant. The kids will be so excited," Daniel replied. His tone was cheerful, but there was no follow-up offer. No, "Let me help with the booking," or "We'll cover your fare." Not that I expected it. I'd learned a long time ago not to. We said our goodbyes, and when the call ended, I kept the handset pressed to my ear for a few seconds longer, listening to the empty click of the line. On the counter sat a plain white envelope, the one I'd kept at the back of the dresser for emergencies. Inside was the money I'd set aside from last Christmas. I'd been saving it for something practical, a boiler repair maybe, or the dentist. But as I stood there, I decided that being wanted, or at least feeling as though I was, counted as an emergency. That evening, I sat down at the dining table with my laptop and a pad of paper. The process was almost ceremonial. Flicking the lamp on, finding my glasses, smoothing the paper flat. After 20 minutes of comparing prices and departure times, I found it. A non-stop flight from Bristol to Manchester, just shy of $70. There was an option to pay 12 extra for a seat with more legroom. I hesitated for half a second, then clicked yes. It felt indulgent. But if I was traveling halfway up the country to be with my family, I could at least do it without my knees knocking into the seat in front. The confirmation email landed in my inbox with a cheery "Thank you for booking" banner. I read it twice before printing a copy for my travel folder. The thought of it, the departure time, the seat number, the simple fact of having somewhere to go, was strangely intoxicating. The next day, I went into town. The high street was busy with early Christmas shoppers, and the shop windows were strung with fairy lights. I browsed the shelves with more care than I'd given to any purchase in months. For Elliot, I chose a hardback adventure novel, something about a boy who could talk to animals. For Sophie, a book of illustrated fairy tales, the kind she could grow into. I had each wrapped in bright red paper and tied with silver ribbon. Olivia had always had a sweet tooth, so I bought a small box of dark chocolate truffles from the confectioner's on the corner. It wasn't extravagant, but it was thoughtful. And then, in the knitwear section of a department store, I found it, the cardigan. Navy blue, soft as a whisper, the wool draping just so at the hips. It had little mother-of-pearl buttons that caught the light. I slipped it on over my blouse and looked in the mirror. The woman looking back at me seemed softer somehow, a little less like the solitary figure who ate her dinners alone in front of the radio. I bought it without hesitation. Back at home, I began preparing for the trip as though it were something fragile that might break if I didn't handle it just right. 3 days in advance, I laid the cardigan on top of my suitcase. I checked the weather in Manchester. Cold, wet, nothing unexpected. I set the thermostat to low, emptied the kitchen bin, and washed the bed linen so I'd return to the comfort of fresh sheets. I didn't tell my bridge group I was going. They'd only ask too many questions, and maybe, if I was honest with myself, I didn't want to invite the possibility of disappointment by speaking it aloud. Instead, I kept it close, like a secret too precious to share. On Wednesday evening, I baked a pie. Not the one I'd be taking with me. Flights and pastry don't mix well, but a smaller one for myself. As I rolled the dough, I caught myself smiling for no reason other than the thought of Thursday evening. The dining table filled with food, the clink of glasses, Sophie's voice calling Gran as she ran to hug me. I imagined where I might sit, how I might slip the gifts under the tree in the corner, how Olivia would nod approvingly at the chocolates. It had been years since I'd been invited into the center of the picture, rather than asked to fill the edges. The night before my flight, I stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing the last of the dishes. The cardigan was folded in my bag, the books wrapped, the truffles nestled between layers of clothes. The pie dish, my good one, was wrapped in a tea towel and tucked safely to one side. I allowed myself to think, just for a moment. Perhaps this year will be different. The kettle clicked off behind me, and I made a cup of chamomile tea to take to bed. As I sipped it in the quiet, I imagined Thursday morning, the train to Bristol Airport, the check-in desk, the soft rumble of the plane as it left the runway. I pictured Daniel and Olivia waiting at arrivals, the children bouncing on their toes. I held on to that picture as I drifted off to sleep, unaware of how sharply it would shatter less than 48 hours later. By the time the wheels of the plane screeched against the Manchester runway, my heart was already racing. Not from the landing, but from anticipation. I'd been counting down to this moment since Daniel's call 3 days earlier. The reunion, the hugs, the warmth of being welcomed. As the other passengers stood, yanking their bags from the overhead lockers, I reached for my coat and slid my handbag strap over my shoulder. My good shoes, polished the night before, clicked softly on the plane's narrow aisle as I joined the slow shuffle toward the exit. The air in the arrivals corridor was warmer than expected, humming with the low murmur of travelers and the squeak of suitcase wheels. I passed through passport control quickly, no queue to speak of, collected my bag from the carousel, and followed the stream of people into the main terminal. And then the waiting began. Under the great green arrivals sign, families and couples clustered, scanning faces as the stream of passengers emerged. Children clung to balloons. Spouses waved handmade signs. The place was alive with embraces, laughter, and the unguarded relief of reunion. I stopped just beyond the barrier, scanning for Daniel's face. 3:22 p.m. My flight had landed a few minutes early. They'd be here any moment. I stood with my suitcase upright beside me, my coat draped over my arm. My navy cardigan felt almost too warm in the terminal air, but I didn't take it off. I wanted to look presentable the moment they spotted me. 5 minutes passed, then 10. I told myself they'd hit traffic. 15 minutes. Perhaps they'd had trouble finding parking. 25 minutes. I shifted my weight from one foot to the other, aware of the ache beginning in my lower back. At 35 minutes, I checked my phone. No calls, no texts. But there was one notification from Facebook. My heart gave a small leap. Maybe Daniel had posted they were on their way, or that they were waiting just outside. I tapped the screen. The photo loaded slowly, the airport's sluggish Wi-Fi teasing out each pixel until the scene became clear. Daniel, in the navy jumper I'd given him last Christmas. Olivia, radiant in a burnt orange dress. Elliot and Sophie grinning, forks in hand, around a table laid with a feast. Roast turkey, bowls of buttery mash, cranberry sauce glowing like gemstones. Candles flickered between them. And there, sitting proudly in the center, was a pie. Not mine. The caption read, "Full house, full hearts. Happy Thanksgiving from our family to yours." I stared at it. The words "full house" twisted in my chest. There was no empty chair in the picture. No gap that might have been meant for me. I read the caption again, as if there might be a second sentence hidden there. "We're on our way to get Mum now." But there wasn't. Just those 4 words. Full house, full hearts. The arrivals hall carried on around me. Reunions, laughter, the squeal of a child spotting her grandmother. I felt invisible, as though the tide of humanity had flowed around me and gone on its way. I didn't cry. Not then. I put on my coat, cinching the belt tightly around my waist, and wheeled my suitcase toward the exit. Outside, the November air was sharp enough to sting my cheeks. The taxi rank to my left hummed with engines. Drivers leaning against their cars, scanning the crowd for fares. I passed them by. I walked. I didn't know where to, only that I needed to be moving. Standing still felt like waiting, and waiting felt like humiliation. Half a mile from the terminal, I saw it. A low, squat building with a flickering neon sign, Annie's Diner. Paper turkeys were taped to the windows, steam blurring the view inside. A bell jangled as I pushed the door open. Warmth and the smell of fried food wrapped around me like a blanket. A waitress with a short ponytail looked up from behind the counter. "Happy Thanksgiving, love," she said, smiling. "And to you," I replied, my voice surprisingly steady. The diner was modest. Red vinyl booths, laminate tables, a jukebox in the corner. A few lorry drivers nursed mugs of coffee, while a young couple shared chips from a paper-lined basket. I slid into a booth by the window. The seat was warm, the table clean. "Kitchen's a bit slow today," the waitress said as she handed me a menu. "But we've got turkey and pie." "Pie sounds good," I said. "What kind?" She grinned. "Pumpkin, pecan, or key lime?" "Pumpkin, please, and a cup of tea." The pie arrived on a white plate, the crust golden and flaky, the filling still warm, a dollop of cream lolling to one side. The tea was strong, dark amber in the mug, faintly bitter, the way I like it. I cut the first forkful slowly. The crust crumbled against my tongue, the pumpkin rich and spiced. I swallowed, then took another bite. It was, I realized, the best pie I'd tasted in years. Not for the flavor alone, but because it was for me. Made by someone else's hands, served to me without expectation, without the weight of gratitude owed. For the first time all day, I let my shoulders drop. I didn't check my phone. I didn't look toward the door, waiting for someone to rush in with apologies and explanations. They weren't coming. Not today. Maybe not ever. I ate slowly, watching the steam curl up from my mug. The murmur of conversation around me was low and comfortable. The clink of cutlery, the hiss of the coffee machine. Somewhere between the last bite of pie and the final sip of tea, I decided I wouldn't ring them. Not tonight. maybe not tomorrow. I thought of the photograph again, the table, the turkey, the pie that wasn't mine, and the absence of my face among theirs. It wasn't just forgetting. It was a choice. When I paid, the waitress wished me a good evening, her voice warm but without intrusion. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the paper turkeys in the diner's windows. I pulled my coat tighter and began walking toward the small bus shelter I'd passed earlier. A timetable hung inside the glass, the pages curling at the corners. There was a bus into the city in 15 minutes. I didn't know what I'd do once I got there. Book a cheap room, perhaps, or find another cafe and linger until the shops closed. But the one thing I knew with absolute clarity was this: I would not be going to Daniel's house. Not now. Not after seeing that picture. By the time the bus rattled into the city center, the November sky had surrendered to darkness. The pavements gleamed with rain, and the shop fronts threw their light across the wet ground like spilled paint. I had no plan, only the certainty that I wouldn't, turn up at Daniel's house uninvited. The photograph had made that clear. The bus hissed to a halt near the station. I stepped down onto the curb, pulling my suitcase behind me. The streets were busy with early evening shoppers, couples on their way to dinner, office workers wrapped in scarves. And there I was, one woman, a suitcase, and nowhere to go. Across the road, a neon sign blinked. Riverside Motel. Vacancies. The letters flickered in and out like they couldn't quite decide if the place was open. The building itself was low and square, a little tired at the edges, but it was dry, it was warm, and, most importantly, it was mine to walk into. The reception smelled faintly of disinfectant and overbrewed coffee. Behind the counter, a man in his 50s looked up from a small television. "Room for one?" he asked. "Yes, just for tonight," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. 45, including breakfast. Full English, tea or coffee. You can settle now or in the morning. I handed over the cash. There was something oddly reassuring about paying up front. No tab, no lingering debt, nothing owed. The key he gave me was heavy, attached to a plastic fob with the number 6 printed in peeling white letters. Room 6 was at the far end of the corridor, past a vending machine humming in the corner. Inside, the air was cool and still. The carpet was thin but clean, the bed made with hospital corner precision. I set my suitcase by the wall, hung my coat over the single chair, and sat on the edge of the bed. The silence pressed in. It wasn't uncomfortable, just final. I made a cup of tea with the kettle on the dresser. The little packets of milk were the long life kind, the sort that don't taste like milk at all. But the tea was hot and strong, and for the moment, that was enough. With the mug warming my hands, I sat by the window. The view wasn't much, just the car park, lit by a single orange lamp. But I watched the rain gather in the puddles and ripple under the wind. For the first time since the airport, the numbness began to lift, replaced by something sharper. Not quite anger, but something adjacent. Clarity, maybe. I thought of the photograph again, and the realization landed with a dull, undeniable weight. This wasn't a one-off. It had been years, decades, if I was honest, since I'd been in the center of my own son's life. I was always peripheral, useful when needed, tolerated when not. There had been birthdays where I was asked to just pop in for tea after the real party had ended. Christmas mornings where my presents were unwrapped hastily before they all bundled into the car to go visit friends. And each time I told myself it didn't matter. That being there in some form was better than not being there at all. But tonight, in a motel room with a rattling heater and a view of a wet car park, I wondered if I'd been wrong. I set my tea down and opened my suitcase. The gifts I'd so carefully chosen sat in their paper wrapping, ribbons still neat. The navy cardigan lay folded on top, soft under my fingertips. I held it up against myself in the mirror. It was lovely, simple, flattering, exactly the sort of thing I'd imagined wearing at their table. And now here it was, under the buzzing motel light with no table to go to. I put it back in the case. There's a peculiar kind of loneliness in motel rooms. It isn't the same as being alone at home, where the walls carry your history and the furniture knows your shape. Motel loneliness is colder, cleaner, like being suspended between two places that both pretend you don't belong. I lay on the bed, fully dressed, the thin duvet pulled over me. My phone lay on the pillow beside me, its screen dark. At 9:17 p.m., it lit up. A text from Daniel. "Mom, hope you got in okay. Things got hectic here. We'll catch up soon." No apology, no invitation. Just that. I read it twice, then turned the phone face down. I didn't reply. I must have drifted off sometime after midnight, the hum of the heater becoming a kind of lullaby. When I woke, pale light was spilling through the curtains. The room felt unchanged, but something in me had shifted. It's strange how clarity comes. Not with fanfare, not with some cinematic moment, but in the quiet between breaths. I realized, with a calmness that surprised me, that I didn't want to go back to how things were. Not to the half invitations, the conditional welcome, the sense of being a background character in my own family. I wanted something different. Breakfast was served in a small dining room near reception. I took a table by the window. The full English turned out to be 2 fried eggs, a rasher of bacon, a grilled tomato, and toast that tasted faintly of the toaster before me. It was simple, but it was hot, and it was mine to eat without anyone watching the clock. I lingered over my tea, watching people in the car park load luggage into their boots. They looked purposeful, heading somewhere they wanted to be. And I thought, why shouldn't I be one of them? By the time I returned to my room, my mind was made up. I wouldn't call Daniel. I wouldn't go to his house and pretend the photograph hadn't happened. I would take my gifts back home. I would wear the cardigan for myself, on my own terms. And maybe, just maybe, I'd plan something for Christmas that didn't involve waiting for an invitation that might never come. Before checking out, I stood for a moment in the middle of the room, suitcase by my side. I thought about how small it was, this space, and yet how much room there'd been here for me to think. For the first time in years, I wasn't measuring my worth by someone else's table. That realization, quiet but solid, was the moment I knew the rest of my life could look different. I didn't need to beg for a seat. I could build my own table, and perhaps that was what freedom felt like. Not grand gestures, not declarations, but the quiet certainty that you could choose where to be, and with whom. The morning after my motel stay, the rain had stopped. The air was cold, crisp, and oddly invigorating, as though the city itself had been scrubbed clean overnight. I wheeled my suitcase across the car park, the wheels clicking over the cracks in the tarmac. My plan was simple: take the first train home. I'd left the gifts neatly repacked, each ribbon retied, each tag still bearing the names of people who hadn't been expecting me after all. The station was already humming when I arrived. Business people in tailored coats hurried toward platforms. School children trailed behind distracted parents, and a busker played a thin, wistful version of What a Wonderful World by the ticket gates. I bought a ticket to my hometown without hesitation. No detours, no last-minute changes of heart. The train's interior smelled faintly of coffee and damp wool. I slid into a window seat, setting my suitcase in the rack above. As the train pulled away, the city receded, replaced by rolling fields and scattered farmhouses. The rhythm of the wheels on the track was steady, almost hypnotic. I pulled out my phone. Daniel's single message from the night before still sat unanswered. No follow-up, no missed calls, just that one perfunctory text. My thumb hovered over the reply button. For a moment, I imagined sending something light. Yes, all fine. See you soon, as if nothing had happened. That was my usual approach, smoothing over the cracks before they showed. But the thought made my stomach twist. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened the Notes app and began typing. Not to send, but to remind myself of the truth. I am not an afterthought. I am not a seasonal decoration to be brought out and set aside when convenient. I have given more than I have taken, and I am allowed to stop giving when it costs me my dignity. Reading those words back was like exhaling after holding my breath for years. Halfway through the journey, a tea trolley rattled down the aisle. The young man pushing it offered me a polite smile. Tea or coffee, love? Tea, please. Strong. And a shortbread, if you've got one. The tea came in a paper cup, the shortbread in a crinkly wrapper. I sipped slowly, watching the landscape blur past. With each mile, the anger in me softened into something sturdier. Resolve. I thought back over the years, the times I'd rearranged my plans, bent myself into shapes that fit other people's schedules, bit my tongue when kindness would have been easy for them to give and cost me dearly to swallow. It hit me then. I'd been handing them my power in small, almost invisible ways, accepting the maybe next time invitations, smiling through the rushed visits, allowing my worth to be defined by whether I was wanted in a room. And now I was ready to take it back. Somewhere past the halfway mark, I began to plan. Not a revenge, not a dramatic confrontation, but something better. I would reclaim my own time, my own traditions. Next Thanksgiving, I wouldn't be waiting for a call. I'd host my own dinner, whether for neighbors, friends, or even strangers who had no table to go to. I'd make my pie for people who appreciated it, not as a bid for acceptance, but as a gift freely given. I'd spend Christmas where I chose, perhaps somewhere new entirely. Somewhere I could wake up to the sound of my own laughter, not the silence of being forgotten. The more I pictured it, the lighter I felt. It wasn't about shutting Daniel and his family out. It was about no longer making them the center around which my life revolved. For the first time in years, the idea of being on my own didn't feel like a sentence. It felt like a choice. The train slowed as it approached my station. I gathered my things, my suitcase lighter now, not because I'd unpacked it, but because the weight I'd been carrying wasn't in there anymore. On the platform, the wind caught my scarf, tugging it loose. I tightened it around my neck and stepped into the familiar streets of home. Before heading to my house, I stopped at the small florist near the station. The woman behind the counter was wrapping a bunch of daffodils for another customer. "Something for yourself, love?" she asked when it was my turn. "Yes," I said. "Bright. Something that looks like it's smiling." She handed me a bouquet of yellow tulips, their petals just starting to open. "Perfect," I said, and I meant it. At home, I filled a jug with water and set the tulips in the middle of my kitchen table. The sight of them made the whole room feel warmer, brighter. Then I unpacked the suitcase. The gifts went into a cupboard, not hidden, but waiting. I'd decide later whether to post them or keep them for someone else. Finally, I took out the navy cardigan. I slipped it on, the fabric soft against my skin. And in that moment, I realized I didn't need an occasion to wear it. That evening, I made myself a simple dinner: grilled salmon, steamed vegetables, a slice of bread still warm from the bakery down the road. I poured a glass of wine and lit a candle, not because anyone was coming over, but because I was worth making the effort for. Sitting there, fork in hand, I felt the truth settle into me like a steady heartbeat. I had been giving away my power in the hope of being loved in return. But love built on the surrender of self isn't love at all. It's dependency. And I was done with that. Later, I took out my phone one last time. Daniel's message was still there. I didn't delete it. I didn't block his number, but I also didn't answer. Instead, I opened a new message to an old friend I hadn't seen in far too long. "It's been ages. How about lunch next week? My treat. I hit send before I could second guess it. It was a small thing, but it was mine. That night, in my own bed, I slept deeply. No restless dreams, no tossing and turning, just the quiet, solid knowledge that the next chapter of my life would not be written by people who left me standing at an arrival's gate. A week passed before my phone rang with a voice I actually wanted to hear. It was Claire, my neighbor from 3 doors down, the sort of friend who notices when you haven't opened your curtains in the morning and pops round with a loaf of bread just in case you've run out. "All right, love?" she said, her voice warm and bright through the line. "Haven't seen you about. Thought I'd better check you hadn't been kidnapped by a book club or something." I laughed, a real laugh, the kind that comes from your stomach, not the polite sort you offer to keep conversation tidy. "I've been processing things," I admitted, "but I'm all right." "Processing things, eh? Sounds like you need a good meal and a proper chat. My place tonight, 7 o'clock. Don't bring anything except yourself." I didn't even pretend to hesitate. "I'll be there." Claire's kitchen was the opposite of Daniel's. No spotless marble counters or matching plates. Hers was warm and lived in, the air rich with the smell of slow-cooked stew. A dog bed sat in the corner, occupied by a dozing spaniel, and every available surface seemed to hold something with a story. A chipped teapot from her mother, a jar of wildflowers from last Sunday's walk, postcards from places she'd visited years ago. We ate at her scrubbed wooden table, steaming bowls in front of us, glasses of red wine in hand. "So," she said, "are you going to tell me why you look like you've walked out of a poem called The Woman Who Let Go?" I smiled at the description, and then I told her about the airport, the photograph, the motel. I didn't rush. I didn't sugarcoat it. Claire listened without interrupting, her expression steady but kind. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. "Well, love, it sounds like you finally stopped queuing at a door that was never going to open for you." "It hurts, though," I admitted. "Of course it does. Letting go of hope always does. But sometimes that's how you make room for better things." Her words settled into me like warm soup on a cold night. I realized that what I felt with Claire, this ease, this absence of performance, was the sort of connection I'd been craving all along. The stew was followed by apple crumble and custard, and by the time I left, my coat smelled faintly of cinnamon and wood smoke. Walking home under the street lamps, I thought, perhaps the people who truly matter aren't the ones you're bound to by blood, but the ones who show up when there's nothing to gain. In the days that followed, I began to notice more of these bonds. There was Mrs. Patel from the corner shop, who always put aside the freshest bunch of coriander for me without asking. There was Eddie, the postman, who tapped on my window the morning after a heavy frost just to tell me the pavement was icy and I should take care. And there was little Sophie from next door, who slipped a hand-drawn picture of us holding hands through my letterbox with the words, "Best friend neighbor," written in her careful, wobbly print. None of them owed me anything. None of them were bound by obligation. And yet, they made space for me in their worlds, willingly, gladly. One afternoon, I sat at my kitchen table with the tulips now in full bloom. I took out the gifts I'd brought back from my ill-fated trip and thought about who they might suit now. The silk scarf? Perfect for Claire. The box of artisanal chocolates. Mrs. Patel deserved those for more reasons than I could count. The hand-knit beanie I'd planned for Daniel's wife. Sophie would wear it with joy, even if it slipped over her eyes. It felt strangely freeing to give them away, as though I was rewriting the story of those gifts, taking them out of a context where they'd been symbols of exclusion, and turning them into acts of genuine care. When I handed the scarf to Claire that evening, she ran her fingers over it and said, "Oh, love, this is beautiful. Are you sure?" "Absolutely," I said. "I want you to have it. No strings attached. She smiled, and it was the sort of smile that doesn't hide anything. The opposite of the tight, polite smiles I'd grown used to from Daniel's table. That Saturday, Claire invited me to join her at the community center's winter fair. It was bustling with people, stalls selling homemade jams, hand-painted Christmas ornaments, and knitted mittens. There was a raffle, a tombola, and a choir singing carols slightly out of tune. I found myself laughing, chatting, and even buying a slice of lemon drizzle cake from a teenager who proudly declared she'd baked it herself. For a moment, standing there with my paper plate and cup of mulled cider, I thought, this is what belonging feels like. Not a performance, not a test, just acceptance. That night, back home, I curled up on the sofa with a blanket, the spaniel from next door asleep at my feet. Claire had loaned him to me for company while she was away visiting her sister. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. The screen lit up with Daniel's name. I hesitated. For a moment, the old instinct, to answer immediately, to smooth things over, to accept any crumb of attention, rose up. But then I thought of Claire's kitchen, of Sophie's drawing, of the way Mrs. Patel smiled when I handed her the chocolates. I let the phone ring out. A minute later, a message appeared. "Mum, we need to talk. Call me when you can." I read it, then set the phone down without replying. Not out of spite, but because I had plans. Claire was coming over for tea in the morning, and I was making scones. It struck me, as I turned off the light, that bonds aren't proved by words like family or blood. They're proved in the small, consistent actions. The knock on the door when it's snowing, the extra portion saved in the fridge, the quiet, steady presence. I'd spent so long chasing a connection that was conditional. Now, I was standing in the middle of one that was real, without even having to ask. It was a Wednesday morning when Daniel finally showed up. I was in the garden, pruning back the roses, when the sound of tires crunching on gravel made me turn. His car, the sleek black one he'd bought last year, was pulling into my drive. I hadn't replied to any of his messages. Part of me thought he'd give up. But there he was, stepping out in a tailored coat, looking like he'd come straight from a boardroom meeting. "Mum," he said, walking towards me, "we need to talk." I set down the shears. "If it's about what happened last week, I think we've already said everything that needs saying." "No, we haven't," he insisted, his voice tight. "You disappeared without telling anyone where you were going. You ignored my calls. That's not like you." "Maybe that's the point," I said quietly. "Maybe it's time you realized I'm not here to fit neatly into the spaces you leave for me." We stood there, the winter air sharp between us. "Mum, it was a misunderstanding," he said, as though the word could smooth over the days of silence, the photograph at the airport, the hollow feeling that had settled in my chest. "Was it?" I asked. "You knew I was coming. You sent me the ticket. And yet, you made other plans." He rubbed the back of his neck, the same nervous tic he'd had as a boy when caught in a lie. "Things changed last minute. We didn't think it would matter if I was left standing in an arrivals hall by myself," I finished for him. "If I was an afterthought?" His eyes flicked away. "It wasn't like that." "Daniel," I said, keeping my voice steady, "this isn't about one weekend. This is about years of me rearranging my life to fit yours, of me being available on your terms, only to find those terms change whenever it suits you." He shifted uncomfortably. "You're making it sound worse than it was." "I'm making it sound exactly as it was," I replied. Silence stretched between us, filled only by the distant sound of a neighbor's dog barking. "Mum, you're my family," he said finally, his tone softer now. "You'll always have a place with us." I took a slow breath. A place isn't the same as belonging. A place can be taken away. Belonging is offered freely, without conditions. For a moment, I thought he might actually hear me, truly hear me. His shoulders dropped slightly, his gaze more open. But then he straightened again, like a man retreating to safer ground. "Look," he said, "Christmas is coming. Why don't you come to ours? We'll start fresh." It was the kind of offer I would have grabbed without hesitation in the past. But now, I saw the trap. A fresh start without acknowledgement. A reset that erased the hurt, but didn't address it. "I'm not ready for that," I said simply. "I need time, and I need things to change. Not just for Christmas, but for good." His jaw tightened. "So what? You're cutting me off?" "No," I said. "I'm setting boundaries. I won't chase invitations. I won't bend my plans to fit around yours. If you want me in your life, you'll have to make the effort. The real kind. Not just when it's convenient." He stared at me, as if weighing whether I was bluffing. But I wasn't. Not this time. We stood in that thin winter sunlight, mother and son. Two people bound by blood, but separated by more than just space. "You've changed," he said finally. "I've stopped waiting," I corrected. A gust of wind rustled the bare branches overhead. Somewhere down the lane, a car door slammed. Life went on, indifferent to the quiet battle unfolding in my garden. "All right," he said at last, his tone unreadable. "I'll think about what you've said." "I hope you do," I replied, because I meant every word. He gave a short nod, turned, and walked back to his car. The engine started, the tires crunched again, and then he was gone. Inside, I made myself a cup of tea, my hands steady on the kettle. The conversation had left a faint ache in my chest, but it wasn't the same ache I used to feel after our exchanges. This wasn't defeat. It was the sting of growth, of holding my ground. I thought about calling Claire to tell her what had happened, but decided against it for now. Some victories, I realized, are best savored quietly. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and wrote in my notebook, "Boundaries are not walls. They are the lines that mark where I end and someone else begins. They are the space in which I can stand without fear of being pushed aside." In the stillness of the evening, I felt something settle in me. Not pride exactly, but a kind of peace. I had spoken my truth. Whether Daniel chose to meet me halfway was his choice, but I had chosen myself. And that, I decided, was enough for now. A fortnight passed without a word from Daniel. At first, I caught myself listening for the phone, half expecting it to ring. But each silent day felt lighter than the one before, as though the air in my house was clearing. I filled those days with things that had nothing to do with waiting. I met Claire for lunch at the cafe by the park, where the owner always slipped us extra biscuits with our tea. I joined a small book club at the library, even though half the time we talked more about life than the novel. I took long walks down by the river, watching the winter sun bounce off the water. Life wasn't grand or dramatic, but it was mine. Then, one morning in mid-December, I opened my front door to find a parcel on the step. No card, no return address, just my name, written in Daniel's unmistakable blocky handwriting. For a moment, I thought about leaving it there, unopened. But curiosity, and maybe a touch of old habit, got the better of me. Inside was a single item, a framed photograph. It was the picture from the airport, the one he'd posted online. But this time, there was something different. The frame was engraved with the words, "Next time, we'll wait for you." I stood there, the photo in my hands, unsure what to feel. It wasn't an apology, not in the way I'd have wanted, but it was something, a small step, perhaps even an olive branch. I placed it on the mantel, not as a sign of forgiveness, but as a reminder. I'd drawn my line, and maybe, just maybe, he was beginning to see it. That afternoon, Claire popped round with a tin of shortbread and her usual unannounced cheer. "What's this, then?" she asked, spotting the frame. "A peace offering, I think," I said. She studied it for a moment, then gave a small nod. "Well, love, even the slowest learners get there eventually. Question is, are you ready if they do?" I thought about that. I'm ready for whatever comes, I said at last, because now I know I'll be all right either way. The days edged closer to Christmas. Neighbors strung lights across hedges. The postman wore a Santa hat, and the air was filled with the faint smell of cinnamon from the bakery down the road. Claire convinced me to come to the community hall's Christmas Eve supper. It was nothing fancy, paper plates, mismatched chairs, but the room was full of warmth. Someone had brought a battered guitar, and before long we were all singing, badly but joyfully. I looked around at the faces, people I'd known for years, people I'd only just met, and felt something settle in me. This was belonging. Not perfect, not polished, but real. On Christmas morning, I woke to frost on the windows and the quiet hum of the heating. There were no piles of gifts, no rush to be anywhere. I brewed coffee, pulled on my navy cardigan, and sat by the window watching the street slowly come to life. A couple walked past holding hands. Children in puffy coats kicked at the ice on the pavement. I thought about Daniel, wondered if he'd call, wondered if he wouldn't. And then I let the thought drift away, because either way, the day was still mine. Mid-morning, Claire knocked on the door, her arms full of Tupperware. "Merry Christmas, love. Thought I'd bring you some of my roast potatoes before they all disappeared." I laughed, ushering her in. We ate them straight from the container at my kitchen table, swapping stories about disastrous past Christmases. "You know," she said between mouthfuls, "it's not the day that makes it special. It's the company." I nodded. "And the potatoes." We both laughed until our sides hurt. Later, after Claire left, I wrapped myself in a blanket and stepped out into the garden. The roses were bare now, but the air was crisp and full of promise. I thought about the months ahead, spring walks, summer afternoons in the garden, perhaps even a trip somewhere new. A trip for me. I no longer felt tethered to someone else's plans. I could choose my own. Back inside, my phone buzzed on the counter. Daniel's name lit up the screen. I let it ring twice before answering. "Mum," he said, "Merry Christmas." "Merry Christmas, Daniel." There was a pause. "I hope, maybe in the new year, you could come round. No pressure." I smiled faintly. "We'll see," I said. And I meant it. Not as a brush-off, but as a truth. Because I would see. I would choose. After we hung up, I poured another cup of coffee, pulled the cardigan tighter, and sat back down by the window. The street was quiet again. The frost was melting. Somewhere, a church bell rang. I felt no rush, no dread, no expectation, just the steady beat of my own life, unfolding at my pace, an open ending, a new freedom. And for the first time in years, that felt like the best gift I could have given myself.